I'm going to be turning things over to Rich Karlgaard, who will be moderating this conversation. He's the editor-at-large and global futurist at Forbes, where he's been for over 30 years, and he was formerly the publisher there. Rich writes the Tech Connect column for Forbes Asia and is the principal moderator at the annual Forbes Global CEO Conference. He also wrote a book in 2014 called The Soft Edge on Innovation Culture, and wrote a book in 2019 called Late Bloomers on the Strength of Learning and Succeeding at Your Own Pace. And Rich is going to be joined here on stage by Vinod Khosla. Vinod is the founder and managing director of Khosla Ventures, which is focused on impactful technology investments in software, AI, robotics, 3D printing, healthcare, and more. He's also the co-founder of Daisy Systems and the founding CEO of Sun Microsystems. He's an AI visionary. He's passionate about making a positive social impact through the use of technology. So this is going to be a really exciting conversation. So without further ado, please welcome Rich and Vinod.
Good morning, everybody.
Well, Chris, thanks for that introduction. I've been looking forward to this interview for weeks and weeks. One of the privileges of working at Forbes is that you get to interview highly successful people. And then there's a category of highly successful people who are successful more than once across their whole careers. And what I've observed about them are some things that are pretty obvious. They work incredibly hard. They put their talent to use. They work with focus. They work with joy and passion. I think we know all of those things. But the thing that really makes Vinod Khosla stand out, and why this is so important today, is having a paradigm, a way of looking at the world. And when Vinod and his three colleagues started Sun Microsystems in sort of in the late 70s, and then it really gelled as a company in the early 80s, it was this idea of the network is the computer. And so there are a lot of people who kind of were aware of Moore's law and the progression rate of microprocessors and compute. But the other side of the equation that was as important, maybe even more important, was the power of networks. And understanding that is so important. And it's only become more important in the age of AI, and particularly as it intersects with education. So when you take all of the things that you accomplished in your paradigm of looking at the world, and you look at education, what are the problems we're trying to solve?
You know, the goals of education are obviously clear to everybody. Better educated, more motivated students. How we've thought about doing it for a long, long time hasn't worked. You know, people have talked about smaller classrooms, better paid teachers. All of it involves money, and it just hasn't worked. Where we are today is, even if we could afford it, I now believe those are the wrong solutions. We can't get the classroom small enough, and if we could, it wouldn't do as well as what the thing we've all talked about, AI is enabling. The level of personal tutoring is just amazing. And you know, this is not something new for us. My wife started CK12 many, many years ago, served millions and millions of students. But we started working on an AI tutor more than 5 years ago. And we've learned a lot about what a tutor should do. Obviously, it gets turbocharged. But the problems we're trying to solve are better educated, more motivated students can best, in fact, only be addressed by AI and, frankly, AI tutors.
Well, before we move on to AI, let's just sort of complete this thought of that we have to pay honor to the fact that education has been one of the jewels of modern civilization. Mass education is one of the keys to prosperity and peace and hope and all the things that we aspire to in any civilization. And it's worked well. It seems like it's hit a wall, though, where the incremental dollar is not producing incremental return anymore. Why do you think that is so?
You know, the things education we spend money on are, in fact, running out of steam. So the scale at which we do education is so large that incremental dollars on a per-student basis aren't very effective in things like class sizes. Obviously, we could attract better teachers, and that's always nice. That's always good to have. But it just isn't enough to draw away from other professions that have much higher incomes. So the dollars you put in will be marginally better in getting teachers, marginally better in getting classroom sizes down, but there just isn't enough scale of money, and the payback isn't large. Like, what do you spend money on that will have large, dramatic impact?
Well, there's been a lot of teaching and criticism around teaching to test performance, and did you see that as a diversion of dollars?
You know, I think that's more what goals do we set for education. At the high school level, and let's talk high school, the goal mostly is either to get through it and get a job or get to college. The get to college crowd is very, very focused on test scores because that's how you get to college. And that problem, I don't know how to solve that problem. Universities do a pretty good job of selecting students, I think. But the ones that have attempted to get away from test scores are all going back to it. We've seen that very recently in a number of places. Very visibly, people who went to not using test scores just have gone back to it because there isn't a better way, at least not one I can think of. Now, I hate to keep coming back to AI.
Well, let's do that because, I mean, you're in such a great position as one of the early funders of OpenAI and just sort of the whole network computing background that you have and your experience as a venture capitalist. When you look at AI, I suppose a lot of people sort of go back to around 1950 and think about the Turing test. Alan Turing said AI will have been accomplished when you won't know whether it's a human being or a machine behind a curtain. And there have been many false dawns in AI in terms of software companies that get funded by venture capitalists for AI projects. The 80s, there was a false dawn, the 90s, early 2000. But all of a sudden, something seems to have happened. A tipping point seems to have been reached. And this looks real, and it looks like it's not going away. Just how fast is AI moving, and why is it crossed that tipping point where all of us in all professions, and maybe education at the very top of those professions, really have to pay attention to this?
So there's a number of reasons AI is moving fast. You know, it's sort of almost a BC and AD kind of phenomena. There's a ChatGPT moment, and there's AI before then, which frankly, I don't consider AI in a very fundamental way. Most of it wasn't learning systems. Systems as they went along learned. And even today's systems like GPT-4 and ChatGPT are not really learning systems in the sense of a human being learning. But what happened in 2017 was there was a paper published. And we've been working, and people say they've been working on AI for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I think they worked in an era that's mostly irrelevant to the new AI. And so everything can be called AI, but it was mostly statistical techniques. A little bit of this and that, other algorithms. But what happened in 2017, this paper was published, And what we learned is...
And this is the famous transformer paper.
This is the famous transformer paper called Attention is All You Need. Attention in a different sense than student attention. But from there on, progress has been rapid. And we've discovered that these AI systems can learn a lot of things. Not only that, the bigger you make them, the better they get. The more irrelevant stuff you give them to the task at hand, the better they get. So you give them one piece of data on images, and they get better at reasoning. This kind of learning is very unusual and gets better with scale. So they're scaling very rapidly, and nobody knows when they will stop scaling or when we will run out of data.
Well, then there's the hardware component. I don't know if you caught the news last month that NVIDIA came out with a new chipset called Blackwell. Blackwell runs up to, get this, 30 times faster than NVIDIA's current chipset, Hopper. Not twice as fast, not 5 times as fast, 30 times faster. It kind of blows that Moore's law out of the water, doesn't it?
Well, hardware performance will keep going up. Yes, this is a very specialized kind of architecture for one set of things it does very well, which is, the basis of AI is multiply and accumulate. It's just called math. And if you do those two things well, the rest sort of just scales. So everybody always talks about how many multiply accumulates you can do in applying the transformer algorithms. So these CPUs are being trained to do this, obviously with a lot of power consumption, but they're scaling pretty well and will keep happening, a lot of attention. But the real reason you asked me why AI is at this moment, the progress in the last few years has been so large that it's suddenly become the area for every smart person to be in. So it's attracting talent, which is the core of innovation. And it's attracting every sort of experimentation that you could possibly imagine. And I think when you have that much effort on something from really smart people, you're going to see accelerating progress. In fact, I would venture to guess AI in 5 years will look nothing like AI today. We'll see so much more progress that every year will surprise us.
Well, let's turn this magical superpower that is now a real rather than a novelist conception of real. It's really here. And what can we do better with AI in education? And you have this great idea of what you call a pervasive tutor. And I'd love to have you talk about that at length, because I think it really goes to what exactly AI can do in education that will be utterly transformative.
So I believe, and by the way, this is not new. I first wrote a blog in TechCrunch in 2012 on AI tutors. It's been very clear to me it is the only solution to the education problem of personalized education that's equitable. Everybody gets the same level of tutoring and education. We can come back and talk about the role of teachers and what role they have to play. But a tutor can work on a child's schedule, learn things the way the child wants to learn. If a child is a visual learner or an audio learner, it can adapt to different styles and even different types of intelligences that Howard Gardner talked about a long time ago. I think he defined 6 and has increased it to 9 now. So it can be very personalized to a learning style of a student. It can be very personalized to the level of a student. Even in a small class, there's students below grade, there's students at grade, there's students above grade. A CK12 tutor, in just a few questions, can figure out which level is the student at. That's pretty amazing. So it really starts with assessment. In fact, it can very quickly determine where the gaps of knowledge are in a student through knowledge tracing. And then you can teach to the gaps in knowledge. A teacher can only lecture to a classroom, which is not a great job. A teacher as a motivator for students, as a coach for students is the right job and why most people went into teaching. And so you can do more of what a teacher wanted to do and is more motivating for a teacher while providing personalized attention to each student at a very, very fine-grained level. If a student, for example, loves soccer or loves cricket or loves fashion, you can generate new content with generative AI and frame your problem in those terms. We couldn't generate an infinite amount of content because it was so expensive. Content is near free. Now you can teach to each student's intersections. Whether they're interested in the piano or in soccer, you can use examples from that domain, whether you're teaching physics or chemistry or math. So this is where you come to where the student is, what the student is interested in, what grade level they're at, what time of day they work best. So you can really, really personalize it at an extreme level.
And how do you think this will be priced? I mean, the other part of your vision is that this will be
free,
deeply, deeply affordable for the many.
Yeah. Look, this is all software. The marginal cost of software is free. CK12 is a nonprofit. So other than the cost of computing, there's no cost to it. And there's no reason anybody running a school or a classroom or managing students in this hall shouldn't be using a personal tutor for everybody. It'll also get rid of the teacher's task of having to spend their Sunday doing grading, which an AI tutor can do much, much better than a teacher could by giving the same problem to all 50 students in your class. You can personalize things and give them in increments that the student's ready to take, so you don't get frustration because something's out of reach. It's hard to imagine the level of detail with an AI tutor. And this has been going on for a long time in CK12. They had homework helpers, so you could give hints to a student on how to solve a problem with infinite patience and no cost. But it's just the cost of computing, and so it should be free. And we've chosen to do AI tutors as a nonprofit effort for that reason. I know there's a lot of companies out there putting little wrappers around ChatGPT to make it a tutor. But unless it is grounded in real, the science of learning, unless it's grounded in knowledge graphs of what you're trying to teach, the 5,000 or so concepts in STEM a high school student needs to know, and know what the gaps are, and know how to assess those gaps, there's a lot more to it than just ChatGPT. ChatGPT does the chat part pretty well. It has to be guided by a structure that is much more sophisticated. So on the surface, in demos, all these look alike. But when you take something that's been developed over a period of time before ChatGPT and add ChatGPT to it, you suddenly get all this diversity in generative content, the personalization, yet you have a methodology behind it, and that's what makes something really, really special.
Well, we'll get to the role of teachers, because this will profoundly affect how a teacher will go about his or her job in the future, and I know you have views on that, but I wanted to ask one more question about the students, and you talked about learning gaps, but there are also wealth and poverty gaps. There are homes that are conducive to learning and homes that are an absolute dysfunctional wreck. and not conducive to learning. There are different motivations, even within the same student. They may be motivated on Tuesday and completely alienated and angry on Wednesday and bored on Thursday. So we're talking, in other words, about messy human beings. I mean, how can AI sort of help there too, to maybe recognize that a student is quietly given up or is entering a state of depression or anxiety? We all know that among American teens today, depression and anxiety are through the roof, you know, and so it's hard to be a learner when you're overwhelmed by depression and anxiety.
Look, we recognize and should recognize that every student's personal circumstances are different, that they have different home lives. Some are luckier than others. Some are more conducive to learning than others. What's the best we can do? We can adapt to each student, teach when they can learn, how they learn. There's another side of it, and I'm also very, very excited about AI therapists. They will also be near free. In fact, should be built into an AI tutor is an AI therapist. Today, in mental health assessment in the UK, fully 40% of mental health clinics in the UK are using an AI intake therapist for intake of patients, which is a requirement of the NHS. If anybody knows the NHS, they know it takes a long time to get an appointment because it's a national service. Well, this is instant. Its diagnostic accuracy is better than humans in directing patients, incoming patients, to the right place. Why shouldn't it be built into every AI tutor? Why shouldn't it be built into motivating students, getting students to the point where they can be learners? And I do think that's an opportunity, given what's going on with mental health in young people. It's a real opportunity to combine those. By the way, I'll give you another study that was just done. And these are large studies because they're done online. 100,000 patients. When an AI did the intake, diversity increased dramatically. Like 30% for Asian students, 50% for black students, something like 130% for people in the transgender community. Inclusion improves because these systems can be far less biased. I'm not saying they're not unbiased, but compared to humans, they're much less biased. And we've seen at very large scale that all those things improve. And I think the next step will be then charting an individual, both mental health journey and a learning journey. The mental health part gets them to a point where they are more motivated to learn, more willing to learn, see more purpose, and the AI tutor then teaches in their context.
Yeah, that's really terrific to hear. I think that's going to be a fundamental part that will make it work. So let's switch perspectives and talk about teachers' emerging roles as AI unfolds and gets more widely used. What becomes the role then of the teacher in this new world?
Well, you know, it is sort of sad in this day and age. We still have classrooms with wooden chairs and teachers lecturing like we did a couple of 100 years ago. You know, much more is possible. It's hard to get rid of convention, but the teacher wants to be the coach, the motivator. But they don't have time for it with all the things they have to do. I've said at CK12, if we can free up teachers' time, they will adapt it. There's no reason they should be spending Sunday afternoon grading or doing lesson prep when the AI could be doing those things in a much more fine-grained way. And I want to come back to this topic of assessment if we have a minute or two, because teachers aren't the best people to do assessments. So teachers should be coaches and mentors and coordinators of group discussion. There's a lot to be learned by 10, 20, 50 kids in a classroom interacting in the right way. And a teacher is perfect to guide that interaction, because students not only learn from books, they learn from each other. And that should be the role of the classroom, whether it's configured as a classroom or something else. And the teacher's role should be coordinating that and managing it. I think it's a much more rewarding life for teachers than what we have today.
Yeah, I would just add as an anecdote, how many of you saw the Apple series Ted Lasso? You know, about the soccer coach. The coaching of soccer was like the least thing that he did in the show. It was about motivating and taking people as they were, and a lot of broken people, and it was really a show of forgiveness and love and redemption, really quite amazing. And I agree with you that I think that people go into teaching to play that role, and then they're overwhelmed with minutia, and if this frees them up, that will be terrific. But we do live in the real world, and it's probably, you know, a lot of teachers are going to look at these rapidly galloping AI powers coming into education, and they're going to be naturally resistant, as anybody would, because they're going to wonder whether their life of investing in their profession and the education that led to their profession is suddenly irrelevant. I mean, you make a persuasive case that it won't, it will be liberating, but how do you see that unfolding? I mean, how can we turn, not through force, but turn resistors into at least people who are curious about the benefits?
I don't see teachers resisting. I do think the role that's needed. And teachers do see some frustration today, so let me go to that. The general lament is, hey, students are doing their homework with ChatGPT. How many people complain about that? A lot. And how can we assess students? The answer isn't preventing that from happening, because you can't. But I would venture we look at the end product of an assignment, because that's the only way we could do it. Class of 50, everybody submits an assignment, you grade it on the weekend and give them a grade. How about if you graded every interaction a student had with an AI tutor? Far more accurate assessment than if they were just doing an assignment which they could cheat on. So I do think assessment will become much, much better, very fine-grained in the way a student acts with a tutor. The kinds of questions they ask, he or she asks. It's like, how quickly do they answer a question? What do they get? And then helping them where they don't understand a concept, where a tutor's patient and improves their skill level. CK12 found that 2/3 of students who used the tutor had their skill level improve. That's a pretty high percentage. And in fact, we are just at the beginning of refining how these tutors operate. So I'm very, very optimistic about that.
Explain this connection between the software world of open source and what that means in education, both for maybe textbooks of the future, but I'm really intrigued, based on what you just said here, open source suggests that in a connected world with these AI tools, that some of the best teachers will be students themselves, who are motivated to help their fellow students.
Yeah, look, I'm 69. I spend more of my time on learning today than any other single task. I have bags and bags of reading every weekend. It's fun to learn, and everybody can be a learner at every age. If teachers are going to teach well, they're going to be learners, good learners too, and should be. It comes from, once you get frustrated with the system, which many people are, you sort of become closed. You have a closed mind. You're not curious about what else can be done because there's so many frustrations. I do believe teachers who start to push the edge on this will find their frustrations decline over time. I would also say one thing, and a pleading to everybody in the audience. The world works on role models, whether it's Taylor Swift or Joe Montana. If a teacher, a school district, a school system becomes a role model for the kind of world I'm talking about, by experimenting, taking some risks, redoing the things that don't work, powering that, I think others will follow. So we do need a few people in this new AI world to be role models by being early innovators.
Well, that's an inspiring call to arms, Vinod, and it's perfect because we've come to the end of our session here. I want to thank you very much for your attention. Let's give Vinod a big hand.
Thank you.